Did you know that one mistake could cost millions of lives? In this story, the USA decided the fate of the war in just a few days. If you're interested in the truth about World War II, subscribe and hit the like button. There are many shocking facts ahead. December 16, 1944. Dawn broke over Monschau, Germany, and the frozen ground shivered beneath the relentless roar of American artillery, but this morning carried a terror unlike anything the soldiers had faced before. Something had changed, terrifyingly, bewilderingly changed. The shells did not smash into the earth or shatter the trees. They hung in the sky, detonating above the advancing German lines with deadly precision. A rain of steel fragments cascaded down, tearing through uniforms, helmets, and the earthworks meant to shield men from death. Among the 326th Volksgrenadier Division, storming forward against the 38th Cavalry Squadron's positions, were soldiers hardened by years of brutal fighting on the Eastern Front. Yet, even they faltered before this incomprehensible nightmare. This was not the familiar rhythm of artillery fire, with its predictable craters and temporary havens. No trench, no foxhole offered protection here. This was a new calculus of death, raining down from above with cold, unerring logic. At the heart of this sudden fury was Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 4th 6th Artillery Group. Against standing orders and without higher authorization, he had made a choice that would echo through history. His gunners loaded shells equipped with the Allies' most jealously guarded secret: proximity fuses. Tiny radar systems within each shell measured the distance to the target and triggered explosions at the perfect height, transforming ordinary artillery into a weapon 50 times deadlier. In the icy Ardennes forests, the mathematics of destruction had been rewritten. What the German troops could not know was that they were facing not just superior firepower, but a technological revolution, one that would redefine warfare far beyond the Battle of the Bulge. For the Wehrmacht, Operation Watch on the Rhine, Hitler's audacious gamble had begun with grand expectations. 200,000 soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces had been massed in secret amid the fog-laden Ardennes. The Führer promised that this strike would split the Allied armies and reclaim Antwerp, reversing the inexorable slide toward defeat. At 0530, German guns unleashed an 85-mile artillery barrage, raining 1,600 rounds per minute. American intelligence had utterly failed to foresee the buildup. Many frontline units were green recruits or exhausted veterans rotated to this supposedly quiet sector. Yet at Monschau, Colonel Axelson confronted a dire tactical reality. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, a small reconnaissance unit, was being crushed beneath superior German numbers. Conventional artillery offered no hope of repelling the assault. In a moment that would later threaten court-martial, Axelson made the historic decision to fire the secret proximity-fused shells. He understood, with grim clarity, that obedience meant annihilation. The impact was immediate, catastrophic, and unprecedented. German soldiers advancing in disciplined formations suddenly faced a firestorm unlike anything in their experience. Shells detonated 30 to 50 feet above the ground, each explosion spraying a deadly cone of fragments, blanketing far more area than any conventional shell could reach. Death fell from the sky with terrifying precision, and the Ardennes forests rang with a new, horrifying symphony of war. Veterans who thought they knew how to take cover from artillery found themselves cut down in their foxholes, behind trees, in ditches, anywhere they sought shelter. Death had taken on a new form, a secret science unleashed from above. The proximity fuse represented the pinnacle of American scientific ingenuity and industrial might. Unlike conventional shells, which required direct hits, or timed fuses that often detonated too early or too late, the proximity fuse contained a self-contained radar system no larger than a coffee can. Inside each fuse, American engineers had packed 130 electronic components, including 4 or 5 miniature vacuum tubes, depending on the model, capable of surviving the unimaginable force of 20,000 times gravity when fired from an artillery piece. The physics alone were staggering. At the moment of firing, a tiny glass ampule filled with electrolyte would be crushed, generating a battery that powered the radar for the entire flight of the shell. Dr. Merle Tuve at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory had driven this development with the intensity of the Manhattan Project. The laboratory, disguised as an abandoned used car dealership in Silver Spring, Maryland, employed 3% of all American physicists at its peak. Security rivaled that of the atomic bomb program. Workers could not speak of their work, even to family, and each fuse carried a unique serial number for tracking. The technical hurdles were nearly insurmountable. Vacuum tubes originally designed for living room radios had to be reinvented to survive cannon fire. They needed to function while spinning at extreme speeds, endure any weather, and detect targets without detonating prematurely. Breakthroughs in miniaturization techniques that would later revolutionize electronics made it possible. Dr. James Van Allen's tubes were no bigger than pencil erasers, yet contained all the functionality of conventional radio tubes. By December 1944, American factories were producing 40,000 proximity fuses daily. Over 100 companies contributed, from RCA and General Electric to Sylvania and Crossley Corporation. The program's cost reached $1 billion in 1940s dollars, second only to the Manhattan Project in wartime expenditure. Axelson's unauthorized use on December 16th triggered an immediate command crisis. He had violated direct orders limiting proximity fuses to anti-aircraft use, fearing that captured examples might be reverse-engineered by the Germans. Yet the effect at Monschau was undeniable. The German attack had been stopped cold, leaving casualties that stunned both sides. News of the weapon's devastating impact reached Supreme Headquarters swiftly. Recognizing the desperate situation unfolding across the Ardennes, General Eisenhower formally requested authorization on December 19th. By December 24th, all restrictions were lifted, and proximity fuses were cleared for general ground combat across the Bulge. The rapid distribution that followed showcased American logistical superiority. Within days, proximity fuse shells were reaching artillery units throughout the Ardennes. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion at Bastogne received their allocation just as the German encirclement closed in. The Ford 20th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, with their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, began using them to defend the northwest approaches. The 969th Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit under Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes, deployed them with devastating effect southwest of Bastogne. Every unit discovered the same truth. Proximity fuses transformed artillery from a supporting weapon into a decisive battlefield instrument. Forward observers no longer needed to painstakingly adjust fire. The fuses found their own optimal detonation point. Accuracy requirements dropped, while lethality increased exponentially. Bastogne, surrounded yet resilient, offered the perfect stage for this new technology. The 101st Airborne Division, encircled and outnumbered, held the vital crossroads against repeated German assaults. Their artillery support included the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, armed with 75 Polaris Pack howitzers, capable of firing proximity-fused shells. Between December 19th and 31, the 403rd fired exactly 7,676 rounds, according to official records, each one a deadly testament to the new face of war. Although not every shell was equipped with proximity fuses due to limited supply, the ones that were had devastating effects, both physical and psychological. German assault formations simply disintegrated under the relentless airburst barrages, with entire platoons annihilated in seconds. The attack on December 22nd, following General McAuliffe's legendary nuts reply to the German surrender demand, showcased the full power of this weapon. German infantry advancing across snow-blanketed fields in traditional formations were left exposed. Proximity-fused shells exploded overhead with unerring timing, creating overlapping patterns of destruction that left no safe ground. The all-African-American 969th Artillery Battalion played an equally crucial role. Their 155 mm howitzers formed a deadly ring around Bastonia's perimeter, a barrier the German forces could not penetrate. Larger shells, detonating at 50 feet, blanketed even greater areas with lethal fragments. German prisoners later recounted that attacking units often lost cohesion before reaching American lines, with soldiers fleeing in sheer terror from the incomprehensible air bursts. The Sour River slaughter, perhaps the most meticulously documented demonstration of the proximity fuse's lethality, occurred at the Sour River, near Echternach, December 25, 26. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was racing north to relieve Bastogne, personally witnessed the engagement and recorded it in his memoir, War as I Knew It. A German battalion attempting to cross the partially frozen river believed they were concealed by darkness and fog from American observers. Traditional artillery would have required careful adjustments, giving the Germans time to complete their crossing or find cover. But proximity-fused shells needed no such preparation. Patton wrote, "We caught a German battalion crossing the Sour. The new posit ammunition was devastating. The shells burst in the air above them. They had nowhere to run. The river behind them, our fire in front and above. When the firing stopped, we counted 702 bodies." This figure 702 confirmed killed remains one of the few precisely documented casualty counts from proximity fuse use. The efficiency was staggering. An entire battalion ceased to exist in minutes, with no hope of escape or defense. The psychological impact rippled across German units, leaving soldiers reluctant to attempt further river crossings. Forest warfare transformed the dense Ardennes forests, which the Germans had relied upon for concealment, became death traps once proximity fuses were deployed. In open terrain, a fuse detonating 30 to 50 feet above ground was already lethal, but in forests, the effect multiplied exponentially. Air bursts shattered branches, turning them into thousands of deadly wooden projectiles. Splinters, some as long as a man's arm, flew at hundreds of feet per second, claiming lives with merciless precision. Traditional defensive positions, hiding behind massive trees, digging foxholes beneath root systems, offered no protection. Fragments and splinters rained from above, rendering centuries of tactical wisdom about forest fighting obsolete. American artillery quickly recognized this multiplier effect. A single 150 mm proximity fuse shell detonating above a forest canopy could clear an area the size of a tennis court of all living things. The combination of metal fragments from the shell and wooden splinters from the trees created a 360-degree kill zone that no skill or training could escape. German units, even those expert in forest warfare, found their experience worthless. Spreading out to avoid concentrated casualties left them vulnerable to wide-area destruction. Grouping together for mutual support made entire squads susceptible to a single shell. In this new reality, there was no correct tactical response. Technical supremacy. In action, the proximity fuse had not just augmented artillery, it had transformed it into a weapon of unstoppable precision, reshaping battlefields and crushing even the most seasoned and well-trained opponents. The proximity fuse operated on principles that must have seemed like science fiction to soldiers of the 1940s. Inside each fuse was a tiny radio transmitter operating at 180 to 220 megahertz, continuously emitting waves that bounced off everything in their pathground, trees, vehicles, even human bodies. As the shell drew closer, the reflected signal grew stronger. When it reached a predetermined intensity corresponding to the optimal burst height, an electronic switch triggered detonation. The system had to survive conditions that would destroy ordinary electronics. Upon firing, the acceleration reached 20,000 times the force of Earth's gravity, enough to crush a human body to microscopic thickness. The shells spun at incredible rates, generating massive centrifugal forces. Temperatures ranged from the scorching 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit of the gun barrel to sub-zero conditions at the apex of the trajectory. Yet the fragile vacuum tubes, protected by ingenious cushioning systems, functioned with over 80% reliability. Extensive testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground determined the ideal burst heights. For the standard 105mm divisional howitzer, 30 feet proved most effective. The 105mm guns reached maximum lethality at 50 feet. The rare 240mm shells detonated at 70-plus feet, capable of clearing entire grid squares of enemy forces. This technological superiority translated directly into battlefield dominance. Studies indicated that proximity-fused shells were 5 to 10 times more lethal than conventional rounds, with the lethal fragment zone expanding by a factor of 50. Anti-aircraft applications were even more dramatic. Within weeks of deployment, the success rate for shooting down V-1 flying bombs jumped from 17% to 79%. Intelligence failures and German confusion. The German intelligence failure surrounding proximity fuses proved catastrophic. In December 1944, Wehrmacht forces overran an American ammunition depot, capturing roughly 20,000-ton proximity fused shells. Yet instead of developing countermeasures, German technical experts examined the fuses and dismissed them as impossible. Vacuum tubes inside an artillery shell contradicted everything German engineers believed about electronics and ballistics. Some concluded the Americans must be using magnetic detection, or that the visible components were decoys, hiding the true mechanism. This failure stemmed in part from institutional blindness. Germany had actually led proximity fuse research before the war. Rheinmetall Borsig and AEG Berlin had working prototypes by 1940. But Hitler's order to cancel any weapons project requiring more than 6 months to production terminated the program. German engineers could not fathom that the Americans had solved problems they themselves had abandoned. The irony deepened when German technical capabilities were considered. Their electrostatic proximity fuses demonstrated 9 of 5% reliability in tests. using changes in electrical capacitance rather than radar. Had development continued, Germany might have fielded proximity fuses by 1941. Hermann Goering later admitted during interrogation that German fuses were just 3 or 4 months from production when the war ended. The Christmas catastrophe. December 25, 1944, offered no holiday respite. German units attempting to use Christmas for resupply and reorganization discovered that proximity fuses observed no ceasefires. Field kitchens, supply convoys, and assembly areas came under devastating bombardment requiring no forward observers. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion alone fired over 1,000 rounds on Christmas Day, most equipped with proximity fuses. Their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers delivered rapid, accurate fire, catching German forces entirely unprepared. The ability to strike effectively without observation in poor weather and even at night transformed artillery from a weapon of daylight into a 24-hour threat. The psychological impact was severe. German soldiers had learned to move under the cover of poor weather when Allied aircraft couldn't fly and observers couldn't see them. Proximity fuses eliminated that sanctuary. Death could strike at any moment, in any weather, with nothing more than the brief whistle of incoming shells as a warning. On December 21st, SS Colonel Otto Skorzeny's elite commandos made their bold attempt to seize Malmedy. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were hand-picked, highly trained, and infamous. The men who had rescued Mussolini, nearly captured Tito, and infiltrated American lines wearing U.S. uniforms. They embodied the very best Germany could deploy, yet they met with the full fury of proximity-fused artillery, a weapon that turned their American disguises from tactical advantage into deadly shrouds. The shells exploded overhead with almost uncanny precision, as if the ordnance could sense the impostors hiding below. Exact casualty figures remained disputed, but the attack failed catastrophically, inflicting such losses that Skorzeny's offensive operations were effectively ended. Perhaps even more striking was the psychological collapse among these elite SS troops. Soldiers indoctrinated in German superiority and trained to the highest standards found themselves utterly powerless against American technology. Some survivors reportedly charged straight into American lines, choosing quick death over continued bombardment, a complete breakdown of discipline among Hitler's most fanatical warriors. Industrial achievement, the production of proximity fuses, represented an industrial miracle. By December 1944, over 100 American companies had converted to fuse manufacture. Crosley Corporation abandoned refrigerators for assembly lines, Emerson Radio retooled from home electronics to munitions, and Sylvania, RCA, and General Electric dedicated entire facilities to the program. Quality control reached unprecedented levels. Each of the 130 components was individually tested. Every solder joint was examined under magnification. Random samples were even fired to ensure survival under real combat conditions. Rejection was merciless. Any component showing the slightest deviation was discarded. The workforce, predominantly women, maintained this precision under 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Due to strict security, they could not know what they were producing, only that it was vital to the war effort. By December 1944, production had reached a staggering pace, one proximity fuse every 2 seconds, around the clock. Cost efficiency was equally remarkable. In 1942, each fuse had cost $732 more than a worker's annual salary. By December 1944, mass production had driven costs down to $18 per unit without compromising quality. This efficiency allowed the production of 22 million fuses during the war, with 200,000 deployed during the Battle of the Bulge alone. Patton's arithmetic General George S. Patton understood the strategic value of proximity fuses perhaps better than any other commander. His Third Army, racing to relieve Bastogne, used them as a breakthrough weapon. Brigadier General Edward Williams, Patton's artillery commander, developed new tactics specifically for their use. Williams pioneered the time-on-target method, coordinating multiple battalions to fire simultaneously so that shells would arrive together. When dozens of proximity-fused shells detonated at once at optimal heights, the effect was apocalyptic. German soldiers called it the bell toll of death. Between December 22nd and 29th, Patton's Third Army fired 50,000 proximity-fused shells. The results were decisive, breaking German resistance and opening the corridor to Bastogne. Patton himself later wrote, "The funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us. Elsenborn Ridge holds. The Battle of Elsenborn Ridge provided the ultimate demonstration of proximity fuses. From December 17 to 19th, the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions held critical terrain against the 6th SS Panzer Army, including the elite 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. Over 3 days, American artillery fired 160,000 rounds, roughly 40,000 equipped with proximity fuses. Though only 25% of the shells, these accounted for an estimated 60% of the more than 5,000 German casualties. The mathematics were undeniable. German assaults up the steep, forested slopes were met with walls of air-bursting steel. Entire companies vanished in seconds. Bodies piled so high that subsequent waves of attackers had to climb over their own dead. After 3 days, the attacks ground to a halt. Even the elite of the Waffen-SS had been broken by American technology. Operation Bodenplatte's destruction. On January 1st, 1945, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte, sending 900 fighters against Allied airfields. The surprise was complete. Many Allied aircraft were destroyed on the ground, yet returning German pilots encountered walls of proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire. Of 277 German aircraft lost that day, 172 fell to anti-aircraft guns, the majority victims of proximity-fused munitions. The kill rate stunned both sides. German pilots trained to anticipate and evade anti-aircraft fire found shells detonating with uncanny precision, striking exactly where they would inflict maximum damage. The already crippled Luftwaffe never recovered from these losses. By early January 1945, secrecy was no longer sustainable. Too many shells had been fired, too many soldiers had witnessed their effects. On January 6th, the War Department authorized a limited disclosure. The New York Times reported on a new type of artillery shell that multiplies the effectiveness of American guns, without revealing the underlying technology. German intelligence, belatedly grasping the weapon's significance, issued a report on January 10th from foreign armies west. The Americans possess a radio-controlled artillery fuse that detonates shells at optimal height for anti-personnel effect. This weapon has caused severe casualties among our forces in the Ardennes. No effective countermeasures exist. Strategic Impact Assessment post-war analysis confirmed the proximity fuse's decisive influence. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt observed, "The proximity fuse was decisive. Our attacks collapsed not because of American courage, though they fought well, but because of artillery that seemed to have eyes." General Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, testified, American artillery was the terror of our soldiers, especially the new shells that exploded in midair. They caused panic, even among veteran troops. The statistics told the story. Roughly 200,000 proximity-fused shells were fired, accounting for an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 German casualties, up to 20% of total losses. The weapon proved 5 to 10 times more effective than conventional ammunition, and it required no forward observation, even in poor weather. The human cost behind every statistic lay human tragedy. Many of the German soldiers were teenagers, conscripted in the final stages of the war, killed in ways that traditional combat had never imagined. They died at the hands of weapons that seemed to possess intelligence that could find them wherever they tried to hide. American production workers bore their own burdens. Factory accidents were hushed in the name of security. Employees at Crosley Corporation, Emerson Radio, and other facilities suffered breakdowns from stress and exhaustion, producing weapons of unprecedented lethality without ever knowing what they were making, carrying the weight of their silence. Yet the moral calculus of war is never simple. The Battle of the Bulge cost 19,000 American lives. Without proximity fuses, how many more would have died? How much longer would the war have dragged on? How many more victims of the Holocaust would have perished while battles raged? Every day shortened by these weapons potentially saved thousands awaiting liberation in concentration camps. Technological legacy. The proximity fuse program left a transformative legacy. Miniaturized vacuum tubes became foundational to modern electronics. Quality control procedures pioneered for fuse production set industry standards. Organizational methods coordinating hundreds of suppliers became a model for modern supply chain management. Dr. James Van Allen applied his miniaturization expertise to satellite instrumentation, ultimately discovering Earth's radiation belts. Radar principles developed for fuses evolved into the backbone of modern systems. The proximity fuse had not only rewritten the rules of artillery, but had also shaped the future of science, technology, and warfare in ways no one in the Ardennes could have imagined. The concept of autonomous sensors making decisions became the foundation for guided missiles, and eventually, all smart weapons. Every precision-guided munition in use today traces its lineage to the proximity fuse, the first weapon capable of sensing its environment and determining the exact moment to detonate. The revolution that began in the Ardennes continues on modern battlefields where smart weapons dominate the art of war. Final reckoning. The Battle of the Bulge concluded on January 25, 1945, with German forces in full retreat. Hitler's last desperate offensive had cost Germany roughly 100,000 casualties while accomplishing nothing. American forces suffered 75,000 losses, including 19,000 killed. The proximity fuse had proven itself not merely as a weapon, but as a decisive instrument of victory. General Eisenhower later noted that German possession of proximity fuses might have made D-Day exceedingly difficult, perhaps impossible, highlighting their strategic significance. These were not simply improved artillery shells, they were revolutionary technology, fundamentally altering the mathematics of warfare. German soldiers confronted a phenomenon they had never experienced: death delivered by shells that seemed intelligent, capable of finding them wherever they tried to hide, turning the very air into a deadly zone. Their experience marked the entry of warfare into the technological age, From Colonel Axelson's unauthorized first use on December 16, 1944, through the systematic deployment of 200,000 shells across the Ardennes, proximity fuses proved that scientific innovation could yield a decisive military advantage. The combination of American industrial capacity, scientific genius, and tactical adaptation produced a weapon that helped shape the war's outcome. The story of the proximity fuse is ultimately one of transformation, technological, tactical, and human. It demonstrated that an industrial democracy could produce weapons of unprecedented lethality, that innovation could overcome numerical inferiority, and that the side with superior science was likely to prevail. These lessons did not merely influence the remainder of World War II. They reshaped the structure of modern warfare. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the age of technological warfare truly arrived. The mathematics of death were rewritten by tiny radar sets embedded in artillery shells, forever changing how humans wage war. The German soldiers who fell beneath proximity-fused airbursts were casualties not just of a single battle, but of a revolution in military affairs, one that continues to shape the world today.